Welcome to our sponsored program's Budgeting Basics. These videos are designed to help you understand the budgeting process and enable you to create a draft budget for your sponsored project. Today, we will be talking about how to include travel costs in your budget. These videos don't replace working with grants specialists. Our grants specialists here in OSP are experts in the nuances of uniform guidance and know details beyond what we will get into here. They also read through the rules for your specific program to make sure to catch any unique rules that apply. Your assigned grant specialist will work with you individually to construct a budget that meets your needs and complies with all the sponsor and JMU rules and regulations. Having said that, we know there are a lot of questions around where numbers come from, and folks would like to be able to put together draft budgets. For example, to estimate the costs for your project to know if it's too ambitious for the program you're considering. So these videos will give you an overview to help you get started. Today we are focusing on travel costs. Before we get into the budgeting process, I do want to highlight a few key things to keep in mind as you work on your grant. First, using grant funds is not a way around JMU regulations. When it comes to travel, you'll need to follow both whatever policies your sponsor has and JMU's regulations. You can find JMU's regulations in a Finance Procedures Manual, section 4215. We will take a quick look at it now. This is the travel section of the Finance Procedures Manual. As I said, you'll need to follow all JMU policies, including approvals for travel on a sponsored program. You can see that there's a significant amount of material on transportation, lodging, meals, and more. Note that in some cases the JMU regulations may be more restrictive, and in some cases the sponsor rules may be more restrictive, so it's important to be familiar with both. For the remainder of this video, we will assume that your travel is permitted. Okay, now let's dive into actually budgeting. As always, the place to start is one of the templates on our website. To get to the templates, go to Budget Development in this bar on the left, and then select Overview, Templates, and Resources. If you scroll down, you'll come to our set of templates here. The travel section of the templates looks different in the different templates. If you are using our generic template, you can see that the travel is broken down into multiple categories here: conference fees, domestic airfare, subsistence or per diem, lodging, mileage, and foreign travel. On the other hand, if you're using, for example, our NSF or RNR template, the travel is only broken down into two categories: domestic and foreign. And that can make it a little bit challenging to remember what you've included and what you might have forgotten. For example, did you remember to include conference fees when you were calculating your domestic travel? To help with that, we actually have another resource on our website, this travel detail tool. This is a separate travel budget tool that has columns that includes many of the same categories as are in our generic budget template. If you are using our NSF template, our R&R template, or one of the other templates, we would recommend keeping track of your travel costs that you've budgeted within this travel budget tool so that you can remember and refer back to what you've already included. This is especially important when it comes to writing your budget justification. As we go through the budgeting in this video, I'll go through how to put it into this budget tool, as well as how to put it into the generic template. Next, we're going to start the process of figuring out what costs to actually put in the budget, what numbers to put in the line item. Remember that if your project is funded, you'll charge your actual costs to the grant. This means as we go through this process, if you can't determine what the cost is likely to be and need to use an estimate, it's better to err on the higher side. This will ensure that you have enough funds in the travel category to cover your costs, whatever they are, rather than erring on the low side and discovering that you don't have enough funds to cover your costs. We can frequently rebudget unspent travel money into another category, or even if we have to, return unspent travel funds to the sponsor. This is often easier to do than moving money into the travel category. But first, we need to figure out how to even determine what values to put into the line item budget. How do we even budget for travel in the first place? With these categories in mind, let's start by considering a domestic trip. If this is a conference, there will probably be conference or registration fees, so make sure to include those. This is typically one of the easier costs, as frequently they are known, or if unknown, you can use past years to get a good estimate for these. And now is where it starts to get complicated. Let's take airfare, assuming you are flying to your destination. For now, I will assume you at least know where you are going. To include it in your budget, you will need to estimate the airfare, and so you can use a travel website to estimate these costs. The JMU Finance Procedures Manual currently recommends the 4 websites I have listed here. When you look at this, I would recommend using an airfare that's near the middle of the pack, not necessarily the cheapest, because costs change and frequently increase. As mentioned, you will charge your actual costs to the grant. However, when I say middle of the pack, what else should we be considering in that pack? As we know, airlines tend to charge a lot of extra fees. The first thing is that JMU procedures forbid first-class travel, so you can ignore those options. However, the manual also recommends avoiding what some airlines call basic economy, by which I mean a fare that doesn't include carry-on bags or assigned seats. To get the fees for standard economy, it may sometimes be necessary to go to the actual airline website. And this is the fare class we would recommend using, looking for fares that include carry-on bags and assigned seats. As to other fees, baggage fees generally can be included in the budget. The JMU Finance Procedures forbid seat upgrade fees in most cases, so you should not include those. To make sure that you get all the other fees that are tacked on included, I would recommend going through almost to the booking stage to make sure that you get a reliable final cost estimate of the ticket. Now, what do you do if you want to go to a specific conference but don't know where it will be held yet? Hang on, we will discuss that later. But what about if your conference is in DC? Or maybe you just went to visit a nearby collaborator once a month and you won't be flying. In this case, you'll probably be driving and you might want to be reimbursed for fuel, wear and tear on your car, and all of that. This is reimbursed based on mileage, how far you are driving. We can do this using the IRS rate, which is currently built into Chrome River. How can we use that in our budgeting? If you don't want to look it up in Chrome River, you can look it up directly at the IRS website. Here are the 2025 rates. We would use the self-employed and business travel rate of 70 cents per mile. Actually, the 2026 rates have already been set even though they're not listed on that website yet. And so we would more likely use 72 cents per mile. To get the mileage that you're driving, you can simply use Google Maps or any other website that you would like to look up the distances. You'd probably like to eat and sleep during your travels. For lodging and meals, we would budget using the per diem rates set by the GSA, General Services Administration. Again, you'll need to know the location. Speaking of locations, if you're going to Alaska or Hawaii, there's an additional complication. The JMU Finance Procedures Manual treats these the same as foreign destinations, although most sponsors consider them domestic in terms of allowing travel to Alaska and Hawaii, even if they forbid international travel. Therefore, if you're going to Alaska or Hawaii, it should generally be put on the domestic travel line of your budget, even though JMU Finance Procedures treats them as foreign. The GSA does not determine the per diem rates for these. However, the Department of Defense, or now called WAR, does determine per diems for them. So let's look at where you can find both the GSA and the Department of Defense per diems. Here's the General Services Administration website with per diems. Let's say that our conference happens to be held in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We can enter the location here, or you could use the zip code if you happen to know it, and then we click Find Rates. Okay. This first table up here gives us the daily lodging rates, excluding taxes, for the location. We can see that for Minneapolis-St. Paul, this is constant throughout the year, although for other locations, it changes by month. Since this excludes taxes, you may want to round up a bit when you are putting this into your budget. The second table includes the meals and incidental expenses rates and breakdown. There's breakfast, lunch, dinner, and incidentals, which together add up to this M&IE total of 92. There's also a slightly lower rate for the first and last day of travels. The other place that I mentioned to look up rates is the Department of Defense or Department of War. On their website for the continental United States, it will just give you the GSA rates. So you can use this website or the GSA website. Over here on the right is where you'll find foreign and non-foreign um, ocean ocean states of the US. Okay, we'll talk about the foreign ones a little bit later in this video. But for example, if you were going to go to Hawaii, you would select that here and submit. And it would give you a list of locations in Hawaii, along with the maximum lodging, local meals, proportional meals, local incidental, and the maximum per diem, which includes the lodging and the meals and the incidental together. This covers all of the domestic lines in our generic budget template. However, that doesn't mean it covers all of the costs. Occasionally, there will be an additional cost that's not included on a specific line. Be sure to talk to your grants specialist about where it belongs. I think the most common cost in this category is vehicle rentals when there's no other means of transportation between the nearest airport and the conference location. If this applies to you, please be sure to read the finance manual as to what car rental companies may be used and what rental insurance must be included and must not be included. Then use one of the approved companies to estimate the rental costs. So, now that we know how to figure out what the amount that we need to budget is, let's talk about putting those costs into the line item budget. Let's start with our generic budget template. I'll say that my conference fees happen to be $200. I took a quick look at some airfare to Minneapolis, and I'm going to round up and put $250 in this category. Next, I have the subsistence, which is calculated per day. It's broken out into travel days and full days. Now, I'm going to assume that I'm the only one traveling to this conference, so I just put 200 and 250 in here. If it was more than me, then I would need to multiply by the number of people going, obviously. So we'll say it's a 3-day conference, and I'm going to plan to arrive the day beforehand. So I'm going to have 2 travel days and 2 conference days. So here I'm going to put 2 for the number of travel days, and then times the per diem amount that I found on the GSA website for the travel days. And that was 69, so 2 times 69. And then I have 2 full days, so I'm going to take 2 times the full day per diem, which is 92. As noted here, I could also multiply by the number of travelers, which in this case is just 1. But if, for example, I was taking a graduate student with me, I would multiply all of these by 2. Now, if I am arriving the day before the conference, it's a 3-day conference, I'm leaving on the last day, I need lodging for 3 nights. So I would take 3 nights times the rate that is in the GSA for the lodging rate for Minneapolis, and that was $148. And that gives me a total of $444 that I'm going to budget for my lodging. And for now, I'll assume that I don't have any mileage, although I'd actually probably want to talk to the grants specialist about whether to put the cost of a taxi to and from the hotel in this category or somewhere else. You can see that this adds up to the total cost that I'm going to put in for my travel. What if I was using the NSF or R&R budget instead, so that I'm going to keep track of my costs in this travel budget tool? I would start by filling out the columns here on the left. We'll call this Conference A. It's in Minneapolis, MN, and I would put the dates in there. I said just me, 3 nights lodging, 2 full days, and 2 travel days. Okay, so then I would want to look at the lodging per diem rate, which I take from the GSA website again, and that was my rate of 148. So I'm going to put that in there. And the full day per diem rate, that is the $92. And you can see that this travel tool actually automatically calculates the travel day per diem rate. And you might remember that that agrees with what we found on the GSA website. Okay, so over here it's already done some calculations. This transportation and parking, it tries to put something in there. This is one that we often need to adjust, but we'll leave it as an estimate. Remember, you charge your actual costs. But you can see that it calculated the total lodging, $444, total per diem, and right now I'm sitting at my total travel. For transportation parking, I'm going to go ahead and change this to 0 for now, so I'll match with what I had before. For airfare, like I said, I'm going to put $250, $200 for conference fee, and then maybe if I went to budget for a taxi, you would put it in here. Okay, and as I do this, you would see that it automatically puts together the totals for this conference over here. If I have another conference, I would put it in the lines down below, and then this cell right here gives me the total number that I'm going to put in for domestic travel in my NSF budget or my R&R budget. I would keep a copy of this travel budget tool, even though we don't have to send it to the sponsor, because this will be helpful when we fill out our budget justification. Okay, all of this is great if you're budgeting for a conference that's taking place a few months from now, later this year, but there's often a problem because you'll frequently be preparing proposals for 3-4 years out, and you may not even know where your conference is going to be held yet. You might know that you want to present your results at a specific conference meeting 4 years from now, but the location of that meeting might not be known. That's the risk we sometimes have to take in building these budgets. My recommendation is to look at the past 3 years or so of meeting locations and calculate the costs like I did above for those locations. And then I honestly would probably budget a bit above the highest of these. Again, remember you will charge your actual costs. Some people don't want to go that high, and that's fine. Just know that you may have to adjust if it turns out to be held in, say, San Francisco. Note that travel costs are one category where we are frequently asked to adjust budgets down. So if you do put in a buffer, I wouldn't make it a huge one. If you do this, then in your budget justification, you should make sure to include language, not just about the costs that you've estimated, but about how the currently unknown charges will be determined using the GSA per diems, etc. You can find some sample language about this in the budget justification templates on our website. Where are these budget justification templates? Well, back to our budget development page, the overview, templates, and resources one, if you scroll down here, our templates are on the left, but we have budget justifications on the right. In particular, we have a budget justification guidance and sample wording page that you'll find very useful in terms of what to put for estimated future travel costs, including when you don't know the location. The last line item we have to discuss is foreign travel. Nearly all sponsors have additional rules about foreign travel, if they even allow it, and most ask for additional justification for why it's necessary. For that reason, we include it on a different line item in our generic budget template. The NSF and other sponsors expect it to be listed separately on their budgets. You'll want to include the same costs categories as above, but there's some additional complications. We'll start with the per diem, which in practice isn't that different. Although the GSA does not set international per diems, the Department of State does. These can be looked up on either the Department of Defense or War website that we saw above, or directly at the Department of State website. This is the Department of State per diem website. To look up an international location, we go to the country and type in where our travel will be taking us. So for example, if my conference happened to be in Ireland, I would type that in and click go. It brings up the per diem rate for several locations in this country you selected. If the location of your conference is not listed here, you'll want to choose the closest location. So you can see that this is broken down, just like the GSA rates, into a lodging rate and an M and I&E rate, which added together give you the maximum per diem rate. Note that this table is in US dollars, even though the country that you're going to may use a different currency. For example, Ireland uses the euro. When estimating airfare costs for international travel, please remember that most sponsors will require you to comply with the Fly America Act. This act generally means that you'll need to book your ticket on a US-based airline, even if this costs more than a comparable ticket on a foreign airline. When you are estimating costs for your travel, then, please take this into account. There are a few exceptions, although note that to have a direct flight is not one of them, and there are also some open skies agreements. If you're really interested, you can read more about the Fly America Act online. If you're interested, the GSA has a very detailed page on the exceptions. But the most important thing for building a budget is to make sure when you're estimating the costs to only consider flying on a US-based airline. One last thing. Although in this Building a Budget video series we tend to focus on how to construct our line item budget, I do want to say a few words about the budget justification. This is because travel costs are one of the most common costs that sponsors object to. In your budget justification, you need to explain not just how the travel costs were estimated or calculated, but you also need to justify why you need to travel in the first place. Why is this travel necessary for your project? This might be because it's part of how you disseminate your results, or how you will gain the necessary expertise to do the proposed work, or for some other reason, but you need to make sure to put that in. And it's also good if you can refer to the travel not just in your budget justification, but also in your project narrative somewhere as well. So in your budget justification, you might need to say $800 is budgeted to present research results at the annual APS meeting, as outlined in the dissemination section. These costs are broken down as follows, or some sort of language like that. I hope this video has been helpful in terms of how to break out the travel costs. I want to emphasize that you should always work with your grants specialists on this because there are a lot of details, special cases, and other unusual things that I don't have time to get into in this video. Thanks for watching.